I am the cloud management specialist for the Northeast here for the commercial segment. Tom Zabo is aligned to me as a solution architect on the cloud management side. So things around vRealize automation, vRealize operations. And the point of today's webinar is to help educate a lot of our clients, customers, and potential customers that are really looking for vRealize type solutions in their environments to better manage and operationalize their IT infrastructures. Today, Tom's going to talk to you about cloud management from a vRealize operations standpoint. And if there's going to be a Q&A after, so if anybody has any questions, we're going to log all those so we can follow up with those, as well as if anybody wants any individual follow-up, please respond to my original calendar invite email, and we'd be more than happy to schedule something with you guys on an individual basis. And if anybody, no, that's pretty much it on my end. I'm sorry about that. Tom?
Yep. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for the introduction. Appreciate that. Hold on one sec. Still getting a couple of password requests. So again, thanks for joining, everyone. Hope everyone out there is doing as well as they can, given the current state of the world. Appreciate you taking some time out of your day. What we're going to run through right now is what we're calling a power block webinar. So short and sweet, getting right to the point, focusing on a specific use case. In this case, capacity management with vRealize operations. We will get into some details around how our analytics engine is actually working. Not meant to be a completely deep dive, but at least pull back the covers a little bit and provide some food for thought around different concepts that we consider when we're talking about capacity management, and how it could potentially help you. If you're a customer of vRealize operations today, great. If not, maybe you're exploring the tool, just trying to learn a little bit more about it. Hopefully what you see here is interesting. There's a Q&A inside of the Zoom. There's quite a few people on here, so didn't want to, everyone's muted. So probably the easiest thing to do would be to just post your questions in the Q&A. I have a couple of co-hosts as well that'll try to answer your questions. And if we can't get to it, I will follow up and make sure that we answer your questions. Tom and I both of our emails are right here. Feel free to take them down. If you have any questions, offline, feel free to follow up. So with that, we'll get started. So again, just kind of quickly walking through the agenda. I wanted to do a high-level, quick introduction of vRealize operations for anyone that might be completely not familiar with it. We also had a product launch yesterday, so I wanted to touch on that really quickly. Really good timing. So it gives me a chance to talk about some of our new features. We're going to jump into those capacity management concepts, like I just mentioned, just talking about some of the things that we're looking at, what vRealize operations is looking at. So a little bit of PowerPoint, try not to put anybody to sleep, but I think it's really important to focus on some of those foundational concepts to really understand, how it's working and why we're doing some of the things that we are. We will jump into some quick use case demonstrations. Hopefully the demo gods will be smiling upon me today. So we're going to go through some workload, some capacity reclamation and capacity optimization techniques. We'll also do a quick discussion on what-if analysis. That's another piece of our capacity components of vRealize operations, where you can actually model out different scenarios on your existing infrastructure to see what it'll look like. And then we're going to follow up, at the very end, do a live poll. Hopefully you like the content, you like the concept of what we're trying to do here with this webinar. And we figured we'd throw out a couple of options for our next webinar and give you all a chance to vote and give us an idea of what we should be talking about next. So, jumping in here, self-driving operations for VMware Cloud. So what does that actually mean? So vRealize operations is a product, a solution that's been around for quite some time. And it's really the operations monitoring platform at the center of everything that VMware is doing around our software-defined data center solutions and technologies, whether it's something like VMware Cloud Foundation or just running, vSphere today. There's really 4 primary use cases that vRealize operations bring to the table, kind of creating this closed loop for, a good solid ops platform for your, to support a modern data center. So, if you think about it, what it's really doing, it's sitting there, it's looking at your infrastructure, understanding, pulling in every metric that we could possibly get our hands on, analyze it, crunch it, start to build out trends, analyze what's going on inside of the environment. Any tool that you use when it comes to performance baselining, troubleshooting, you need to understand the way an environment normally looks before you can even begin to start thinking about how you can either optimize it or fix it if something goes wrong. So, number one, and probably the most important use case for any IT organization or practice I speak to is, making sure that your workloads are performant. So we have the ability to continue, constantly look at at your infrastructure up to your application layer and make decisions, whether it's something like, automatic workload placement, being able to balance workloads across your data center, but basically just constantly watching the demand that your workloads are putting on your infrastructure and making decisions to make sure that their, performance is going to be there, and the resources that a virtual machine or a container, for that matter, is asking for, it's going to be able to get it. Going hand in hand with that is capacity and cost management. Some obvious things there. If you start to run out of capacity, you're going to take a hit on performance. You need to have the capacity to actually run your workloads. But there's also some other things to think about, and we'll dive a little bit more into this. But, for example, when it comes to capacity today in your infrastructure, how long does it actually take to procure, acquire, and prepare infrastructure? If you're out of capacity, it could take 2 to 3 months to actually bring in additional hosts. So some of the ideas around time remaining concepts and actually how much time you have before you need to start that process is really a key piece of good capacity management and trying to keep keep yourself from going crazy as you're constantly putting out fires and reclaiming disk space here and there. I've been there. So obviously, if we're pulling in all of these metrics to understand performance and capacity, we also have the ability to, start to predict, prevent, and then troubleshoot across a hybrid cloud, a software-defined data center. If you're having problems, we have all of this data where we can understand, trends and what's going on and get ahead of it. Be proactive. Don't wait for that alert. The last thing we want to see is, the alert storm where you have alerts that are firing off constantly, and you create an Outlook rule that just dumps it to a folder, and once every 3 months you go in there and delete all those alerts because they don't mean anything. So let's make sure that we're treating things in a proactive way and trying to be intelligent about what we're doing. And then finally, integrated configuration and compliance. Really what this is all about is being able to help you reduce risk and enforce IT and regulatory standards across the board. And then actually take it a step further where you not only can you report on compliance and things like that and just configuration standards, but also do some automated remediation. It could be something as basic as your NTP settings on an ESX host are suddenly wrong, which can cause all kinds of problems. Rather than just firing an alert, why don't we just let vRealize operations take care of that for you, change that configuration back the way it's supposed to be and keep everything nice and standard across the board. So each one of these topics, we could spend hours talking about the capabilities, but I just wanted to kind of set the stage and give you some food for thought on the different capabilities. So jumping into the announcement, this is a very busy slide. I'm not going to go through every component, but as of yesterday, we released vRealize Operations 8.1. And a couple of the big callouts that I wanted to mention here is it's now available as a service. So what you could think of that is having a tool that you no longer need to worry about the care and feeding of that tool. So it's the exact same code base as vRealize Operations on-prem, but it's running as a service. We're hosting it, we're managing it for you. So you can focus on managing your environment and not worrying about maintaining that tool that's doing it for you. It also shifts from more of a capital expense to an OpEx type of approach. So if you're if SaaS is a kind of a forward-looking approach, it's something that we can definitely have a conversation about and talk more about vRealize Operations Cloud. The other big thing is full support with vSphere 7.0 with Kubernetes, another product launch that we just had. quite a few different launches over the past couple of weeks to keep track of, but just know if you are kind of on the cutting edge, so to speak, with vSphere 7.0, we do have native support inside of vRealize operations at launch. So jumping into capacity and talking about some of these capacity concepts. So again, optimizing capacity is one of the key use cases of vRealize operations, probably the most common topic that I talk about. And, it's really important. Like I talked about earlier, capacity planning is really a key component that allows our customers to transform from what I'll call a legacy management approach to more of a cloud provider model where you can get ahead of things, like I was alluding to earlier, understand how much time remaining, understand how much capacity you actually have, and then be able to do things around, reclamation. Let's pull back these resources. Let's reuse them, and let's identify potential savings opportunities, identify low-cost consumption places. And maybe for a particular workload, it makes sense to run it in cluster A versus cluster B. So we're going to dive into that from a demo perspective, looking at reclaiming some components. And then we could also plan out additional projects and changes down the line, whether it's, hey, we know we need to support a new application with some new virtual machines. Maybe we want to model out adding new hosts or even removing hosts to plan out for the maintenance window, disaster recovery, things of that nature. Really, the idea here is to get away from back of the napkin type of math, crazy Excel spreadsheets, or just wild guesses, where you can use some real metrics and real data to get ahead of your capacity, any capacity issues that might come up, and be able to really plan for the future. So, a couple of key concepts to think about. So first of all is total capacity. As we walk through these slides, think about a cluster. That's probably the easiest concept from a vSphere perspective to really use to visualize some of these ideas and how they work together. We can look at capacity at other objects, the data center, a virtual machine, a host, but for the most part, probably the easiest way to associate this is with a cluster. So, total capacity is all of the capacity that's available inside of that cluster. It includes everything: overhead, HA, buffers, so everything that's available. And then getting into specifically what these different components are. So overhead, that's the resources that the hypervisor actually needs to run your virtual machines or to run your workloads. It is included in vRealize capacity planning calculations. HA, so vSphere high availability, it's a cluster concept where, if your cluster is leveraging vSphere HA, which I hope everyone on the call that's running a vSphere environment is using vSphere HA. Basically what it does is it allows you the ability to rapidly recover from a host outage or multiple host outages. So HA uses something called admission control, which what that does is it ensures that sufficient resources are reserved across the cluster. So there's different approaches to admission control, but essentially what it does is it reserves a portion of the resources on every host inside of the cluster. That way we can support rebooting VMs on other hosts if the host that they're currently on has a problem and goes down for any reason. So again, another important factor to take into consideration when you're looking at capacity. Then we have buffer. So this is purely a vRealize operations metric. It was introduced in vRops 8.0. And essentially what it allows you to do is it gives you the ability to reserve a percentage of total capacity minus HA for cluster compute resources and data store cluster objects. So give you a couple of examples an example as to why a customer would use it. Let's say, hey, we've got some new hardware. We're going to move our existing, some existing workloads over, but really that hardware was earmarked for a specific project. You want to make sure that you're reserving the capacity for the project that is coming up. So it's an easy way to provide yourself a buffer, either just to have a fail-safe to make sure you don't overload your cluster, or, you know, again, if you have future workloads that you know are coming into play. Another quick thing on this, you know, on this slide, this little diagram over here on the right, what this is showing you is a view of our capacity assessment dashboard, where what you can see here is, you know, we're looking at a specific data center production, the clusters that are in the data center, and then you could see here that we've got, you know, 31 days remaining. So how much time remaining before we're going to start to have a problem? In this particular case, the constraint is memory. So you can see, you know, based on our projections, current utilization, and where we're projecting out that dotted line, where we're going to intersect total capacity is where that, how much time we actually have remaining. I have another slide that'll talk more about it. I just wanted to quickly touch on that here. Buffer is taken into consideration for this. And just to dig in a little bit to show you where those settings are, you know, there are policies inside of vRealize operations that control how things are monitored and shown from a dashboard perspective to give you an idea of that time remaining. And this is where you could set that capacity buffer. We can control a buffer up from CPU, memory, and disk space, where you can control it by a percentage to set that buffer across your cluster. So now, usable capacity. So this is what's actually available to the workloads that are running on top of a cluster. So we're looking at, you know, the demand. So we're not looking at the overhead, the HA, or the buffer. The usable capacity is what's actually left over after we take all of those out of consideration. So kind of a key point, there's the total capacity, and then there's the actual usable capacity of what your workloads have available to run. Then we're looking at specific metrics from the workloads themselves. So another kind of key concept to keep in mind is there's a difference between utilization and demand. So utilization is the amount of capacity a workload is actually receiving, a virtual machine is getting from their underlying host, the cluster that they're running on. And then we have demand, and that's what the workload is actually asking for. So where you can start to see problems is if demand is greater than utilization. Now we start to introduce things like, you know, CPU ready time, VM swap. You start to see contention across your environment, which starts to equal performance problems. So that's why it's really important to understand what your actual usable capacity is, and then look at these two different components across the board to understand, hey, am I having contention for these resources? Do I need to start looking at doing something different from a capacity perspective? This is a little example of a metric chart. So looking at specific metrics for a virtual machine, and you can see what I highlighted here is we've got the CPU demand, and you can see we're well over 100% from a demand perspective, and your CPU usage is at 100%. So this is where we're going to start to have contention and start to have a problem. Anything like this, any metric inside of vRealize operations, we can alert upon, whether it's you know, an out-of-the-box alert or a custom alert, where now you can start to look at, all right, hey, let's look at conditions like we just saw where we have contention and make sure that we have some sort of alert, provide recommendations. So there's actually two here. I mean, this first one is kind of obvious. The second one would be, hey, let's look at right sizing, adding some additional you know, vCPUs to the workload. So anything from a metric perspective can be alerted upon, and it could be as basic as an alert that says, hey, you know, you need to take an action. Or, and this is where that self-driving operations component comes into play, we can start to automate responses to these alerts where you don't have to actually even take an action. We can set vRealize operations to just say, hey, if we see something like this, go ahead and add additional vCPU to that virtual machine. Now, obviously, that's a little bit more of an advanced use case. You really want to understand how this works and what's going on inside of your environment. But that's where we are today. And that's, some of our more advanced users are using vRealize operations to start to automate infrastructure responses rather than just having an alert that somebody needs to get to. So a couple of different approaches there from an alerting perspective. One other concept to dig into from a capacity perspective is headroom. So this is another vRealize operations concept that we can add into the mix, so to speak. So we're going to look at this from a demo perspective. So hopefully it'll make, if you've never looked at workload optimization, it'll make more sense when we do a demo. The easy way to think about this is, if you're running DRS today inside of your vSphere clusters, it's an intra-cluster technology that makes sure, hey, let's move a virtual machine to the right place based on the resources that are available across the cluster. If host B has more resources than host A, let's do a vMotion and move it over. So with workload optimization and vRealize Operations Manager, you can leverage VROPs to do essentially do DRS balancing, which is actually kind of a misnomer because DRS doesn't necessarily do balancing, but you can balance workloads across clusters. So now it's an inter-cluster technology where you can set up tiering, and it's based on the intent for your workloads, whether it's something like operational intent, like in this example, we're saying moderate, we want to avoid performance issues, but we also don't want to be moving virtual machines around all over the place. Maybe you have some latency sensitive workloads, and a vMotion in the middle of the day isn't a great idea. So you could set that level, or we can move into more of a business intent approach where, let's say we want to have all Microsoft virtual machines running in cluster A and all Linux virtual machines running in cluster B, set up tiering, things like that. We can use vRealize Operations Manager to do those types of moves and balance your workloads across a data center. And this headroom metric, what it basically does is it allows your clusters to have some space for utilization spikes. So in addition to that buffer, let's make sure that we have some room that if as we're moving things around or throughout the course of the day, if your demand spikes up a little bit higher, we have that capacity to leverage. So just another way to provide additional resources to your workloads. So what vRealize Operations is doing with all those metrics. So there's a Captain Crunch, an analytics engine that's running behind the scenes. So basically what we're doing is we're looking at the overall usable capacity of your environment, understanding the utilization of your virtual machines, what they're actually demanding. So taking all of those metrics, crunching them out, building out trends, a timeline, and then we're able to output certain metrics and information that's helpful. Time remaining. How much time do we actually have remaining in a specific resource before we're going to run out of capacity? You could take that and then start to leverage that for that procurement process that I was talking earlier. If your time remaining is a week and it takes 3 months to get new hardware, you might want to start doing some capacity reclamation, for example. Capacity remaining, real numbers around how much memory, how much storage, so that way you can model out different different workloads on top of that existing capacity. Recommendations, so right sizing, based on the utilization and the demand of a VM, should we give more resources to it? Should we pull some back? And then, recommended total capacity of an environment, what should you have from a capacity perspective based on the demand that you're looking at? So I'm not doing this any justice. The algorithms and intelligence that's going on inside of the engine in vRealize Operations is quite advanced. So there's a lot of information out there to dig deeper into this, but you'll see some of this in the demo and how it all fits in. Couple of quick things around time remaining and how we are calculating all of this. You do have some controls via policy as far as, do we want to be more conservative or do we want to be more, aggressive, taking the mean, the average of our utilization? And we can control that from a calculation perspective, time remaining, or setting the overall risk level as far as, hey, when do we want to start alerting that we're going to have problems? So this is all customizable to fit your environment and fit your needs. And this is just a little bit of a better look at what I was talking about earlier. So this is the historic utilization of a particular environment, the total capacity up at the top, and then what we're starting to project based on either that conservative approach, the upper bound, or more of the mean, the average of the utilization. And then we can start to understand when it's going to intersect with that, the total usable capacity that's available. And that's how we can start to create that time remaining window and understand how far out we can go. I'm going to jump into a demo here, show you what some of this looks like. So hopefully you can still see my screen. So this is vRealize Operations Manager, looking at the quick start. So, coming inside of here real quickly, talking about optimizing capacity, one thing that's front and center, we do have costing metrics available inside of vRops as well. So, identifying total savings opportunities. So putting a dollar amount to capacity that you can reclaim. So let's take a look and see what I have going on inside of my environment here. Assess some capacity. Across the top, when you go into the assess capacity screen, your different virtual data centers. And you can see here, we've got, in this production reclamation data center, I've got 0 days remaining, bit of a problem. And I do see that there is some potential cost savings. So let's take a look and see what's going on here. So we've got one cluster at the critical level, one cluster inside of this data center, production south. Scroll down here a little bit. We're going to see, all right, clearly we've got a disk space issue. Something happened. Disk utilization has shot up through the roof. We're projected to run out. We're actually at the limit right now, so we have 0 days remaining. So if we scroll down a little bit farther, we'll always have different recommendations around what do we recommend here. So in this case, it's kind of obvious. We've got option one. Let's potentially reclaim some resources. So in this case, we can look at powered off VMs, idle VMs, old snapshots, orphaned VMDKs. Let's identify resources that are taking up disk space that maybe we no longer need. And option two would obviously be, hey, let's just add some additional capacity to support these workloads if that's what we need to do. So let's take a look at reclaim resources and let's see what we have here. So opening up a slightly different screen, now we can look and see, okay, so we've got 23 VMs with reclaimable resources. I have a little breakdown on the side here, what's reclaimable. And look at that, we've got 242 gigs of disk space that we could potentially reclaim, which would obviously help with our disk space constraint issue. So down here, we've got some lists of different VMs. So in this case, we have, looks like quite a few powered off VMs if we expand this production south cluster. And there's a couple of options that you can do with this list of virtual machines. So these are all the virtual machines in this cluster that are powered off, how much it's actually costing per month to host those VMs, how much reclaimable disk space is available, and the duration, how long have they been turned off. This is controllable via policy that you can control the time metric as far as how long something needs to be powered off before a VM is going to show up on this list. So there's a couple of things you could do. Maybe you've got a couple of VMs that hey, they have to be powered off for any reason. For some reason, maybe it's you're keeping data around. You can always just come in, select those VMs. We'll take these top two. Say we don't want to accidentally delete them. We want to keep them around. We can exclude them from this list. And it excludes it from capacity reclamation calculations going forward unless you put them back on. So now we can come in here and let's just say, hey, we know anything over 7 days we want to get rid of. So we can just select all the VMs. If we click delete VMs, it's going to give us a little list of what we're actually going to reclaim. So 18 virtual machines, cost savings per month. and the disk space that we're going to be able to reclaim, which is going to be good because it's going to give us a lot of disk space back and allow that cluster to be happy once again. Click delete. It's going to make an API call out to vSphere, out to vCenter. And if we refresh this, we should see that the production reclamation center now has greater than 1 year remaining. It's optimized, everything is looking good, and we cleaned up those old powered off virtual machines. A side note on the costing. So, vRealize Operations has costing to be able to provide showback to different business units, application owners, whatever you want to do from a costing perspective. Not everyone is ready to do showback, but what it can help with, especially when you're having these conversations about deleting powered off VMs as an example, is to start, rather than saying, hey, we want to reclaim 2 vCPUs, 4 gigs of memory, and 20 gigs of data, when you put a dollar amount with it, that tends to resonate a little bit more with folks around, hey, how much money do we actually want to save here, and why we're doing this, and not just being, the IT guy that's trying to, disrupt everyone's day. But there's a real cost associated with keeping things around forever, which has been an age-old problem in IT. So that was the reclamation use case. Now we're going to take a look at workload optimization. So here we're looking at a slightly different data center. So this is production, again, just with a different use case. You can see we've got 65 days remaining in our most constrained environment. Again, some more cost savings. And you can see here that it's saying that it's not optimized. So this is that workload placement that I was talking about, where you can set specific intent around your, how you want your workloads to run, how you want your infrastructure to run. So if we come down here, we take a look at the chart, we could see, okay, we've got 2 clusters in this particular data center. One has a memory constraint, and we're predicting that in 65 days, based on the current utilization, we're going to run out of memory that's available to your running virtual machines. But meanwhile, we've got another cluster that's got greater than 1 year remaining, and he doesn't have any constraints. So what we could do is we can come back here and look at, instead of reclaiming resources, now we're going to look at optimization and look at what our optimization settings are. So here, we can do a couple of different things. We can manage DRS. We can set that intent that I was talking about earlier around, hey, how do we want to run our workloads across our environment? So in this case, our intent is set to balance. So let's avoid performance issues, but make sure that we're balanced across the board. We're not doing anything with business intent. But meanwhile, you can look down here and see that, our clusters aren't currently meeting our utilization objective. Production Central is using about 40% of their CPU, it has about 40% utilization from a CPU perspective, and Production West has an 84% utilization from a CPU perspective. So what we can do is we can optimize this. We can schedule it, we can automate it to do this, automatically, or you can do it manually. For the purposes of the demo, we're gonna walk through it, how this optimization works. So if we click Optimize Now, what we're gonna get is a little a placement wizard that's gonna come up, and it's gonna show you the before, what the current environment looks like, and then after we do workload optimization, what it would look like. So you could see we're gonna do some work to kind of balance out the overall CPU utilization of the environment. And then we can look and see what's actually going to happen to do this. So in this case, we're going to move a bunch of virtual machines from Production West to Production Central. So we're moving from one cluster to another. We're not doing anything from a data store perspective. We're just doing some vMotions. And we can look and see, the reason why we're doing this. And we can go ahead and click Begin Action. Refresh this, and now you can see we're optimized, we're meeting the intent, and we're more at, we're at 53% and 54%. So our workloads are balanced across the data center. So quick question, I got a question from Daniel about cost savings, how it's calculated. So just a real quick touch on that. We have cost drivers inside of vRealize Operations that cover basically every facet of a data center, from your hardware, your storage, licensing, and it's all MSRP or industry standard pricing that's built into the product. There's a database on the back end that does that. It is all completely customizable. So if you know, hey, I'm not paying MSRP for a specific server, you can set the costing to what you're actually paying for something, what it costs you to run in a specific facility. You can even edit in things like labor costs, for example. So there's quite a bit you can do from a cost calculation perspective. All right, so with that, I know we're getting towards the end here. I'm going to jump back into my PowerPoint just to talk a little bit about what-if analysis. So there are, another component of that capacity management is being able to model out different scenarios in your environment. So I figured this would be the easiest way to just kind of take a look at some of the different options that are available. So, we can model out, hey, we have to add new VMs, some new workloads to our environment, model it against different data centers, different clusters. We can model in adding physical infrastructure, new hosts, removing hosts. You'll notice that we do have a separation between hyperconverged infrastructure and more traditional infrastructure. And that comes down to the way storage is calculated, because it's obviously a little bit different in an HCI world versus, a traditional 3-tier environment. So that's why we have that differentiator. vRops is intelligent enough to understand, hey, we're running vSAN or we're not, and it'll be able to adapt to your environment. And then we can also do things like data center comparison. So being able to look at, what your, identify the lowest cost consumption. So if you have multiple data centers, multiple clusters inside of those data centers, where does it actually make sense to run a particular workload? And we could also do comparisons against the public cloud. So we have rate sheets for VMC on AWS, Azure, GCP, all the major cloud providers, and you can actually upload your own rate sheets as well to do comparisons. So if, let's say, you have some workloads sitting in like a tier point or a rack space, you can actually bring in your own pricing, so to speak, to model out what it would look like to move a virtual machine from one place to the other. Just give you a bit of a better look into that what if data center comparison. So you can look at your different data centers, look at existing VMs, or model them out. So that's what this little diagram up here is looking at. You could either, if you know what your application profile is, how many CPUs, memory, disk space, or if you want to import from an existing VM, an existing workload, you can model it out across your different environments and figure out, the cost to run those VMs and if it would fit in a specific data center or cluster or not. And essentially, you would get the same viewpoint looking at the public cloud as well. So it's a great way to start to understand, where's the best fit for a specific workload. And, especially if you have a scaled out infrastructure, you've got, someone coming to you with asking for new resources, help you model out and look and see, all right, hey, this is the best place for me to actually host this particular resource. So with that, we're coming to the end of our conversation here. I do have a couple of questions coming into Q&A I'll try to answer. Just give me a second, and I'm going to put up our poll for our next webinar. Hopefully this has been helpful for you so far, and hopefully you can see my poll. If you get a chance, I'd appreciate if you can respond as far as, any topics that you would like us to go into, in the near future. There's a couple up there: what's new, troubleshooting, management packs. And by all means, if there's something else that you would like to see, feel free to shoot us an email. So one of the questions is, how can we find out more about vRealize operations for cloud? Great question. So if you go to cloud.vmware.com, which I'm going to hopefully put into the Q&A right now, this is where all of our SaaS-based products are available for information. There is a large vRealize operations for cloud button where you can dig in, understand some of the capabilities, and you can even sign up for a free trial. So by all means, take advantage of that. Another question, we'll just say, how much does service cost? So let's talk through that a little bit. Easiest thing there would be to either look at that cloud.vmware.com page. There is pricing for the SaaS option, or speak to either Tom or I or your VMware account executive, and we can dig deeper into that at some point in time. Let's see, both Azure and AWS public cloud and instance types. So we can monitor Azure and AWS with vRealize operations. From a costing perspective, that would actually want to talk about Cloud Health, which is a different offering from VMware that focuses primarily on cost and governance of public cloud providers. So again, that's something else that happy to get into at some point in time. And then Daniel, for automated actions, has VROps now got full access to workflows in VRO? Not exactly. You do need to present the workflows, but there's quite a few that you can have, and I'll reach out to you and we can talk about that a little bit offline if it's a little bit of a deeper conversation. I don't want to just sell it short with a quick answer like that, Daniel. So we could talk about that at some point in the near future. So thank you all for responding to my poll. Really appreciate it. Hopefully this has been helpful. I know I was going rather quickly. Just again, kind of wanted to provide some food for thought, give you an idea of some of the capabilities through the demo. Happy to go deeper at any time if you're interested. But thanks again. Hope everyone has a nice day, and talk to you soon. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Have a great one.